start us off, we've got Hyper Light Drifter, a 2016 indie hit of a video game made by Alex Preston and his small game studio Heart Machine. You play as Drifter, who is a disabled protagonist, and they have this chronic, degenerative, seemingly terminal illness that's looming over them. He's shown in various scenes coughing up blood, struggling to breathe, and his illness and disability is interestingly personified as this giant monster, this blobby black monster that he grapples with as soon as the game opens in the opening scene, and periodically does as the game progresses. And he is desperately trying to seek a cure, some kind of cure, and the ending is pretty ambiguous as to if he finds it. And the game is very personal to Alex, the creator, stemming from his own disability, grappling with congenital heart disease for his whole life. The main character in Hyper Light Drifter suffers from a deadly illness, one he is desperately seeking a cure for. It haunts him endlessly. That's something that I am keenly familiar with, is a quote from his interview with The Guardian. He also discusses this in another interview very early on into the game's development, highlighting the autobiographical nature of the game, as well as having a disabled character that remains competent despite his limitations and disability. And here's a quote from that one. "My maladies have always been my art, especially in this game. The story revolves around an ailing drifter. He's coping with his own set of problems, but he's still managing to live his life and do his job, essentially. There's definitely some autobiographical elements in the story." And this game really seeks to personify Alex's emotions around his physical fragility, and I think that especially makes the final piece of music in the game all the more moving, because it is the only piece in the game played on piano, and it's very aptly called Panacea, the cure of all cures, which feels more like myth than truth to a lot of people with disabilities, and I'm sure it's the same for Alex, whose disability cannot be cured, and it's something he has to live with for his entire life. And that feels very similar to my own disability, which is chronic. It's not going to go away. It's left over from having surgery after I broke my spine and having metalwork implemented, and that has given me mobility issues, and those things can't just be cured by this magical panacea, even if I sought it like Drifter in the Hyper Light Drifter game. I spent 3 weeks in the hospital following my car accident, an initial 2-3 days in the intensive care unit while I had my 2 emergency surgeries. My second emergency surgery was securing/bracing the fracture in my spine, which is titanium metalwork. I had to slowly start to sit up, walk and do basic functions again. The first time I showered, I had to be helped by 2 people, and the pain of standing up made me cry. For at least the first month following my spinal surgery, I couldn't even tie my own shoes. Because this had such a big impact on me, I explored disability heavily in my work, and I still do. I am also drawn to a lot of media by other disabled creators, like Hyper Light Drifter. It can feel very cathartic to explore your disability through your work. I also related to Alex, saying he explored talking about his disability while at art school, trying to see what stuck and what stories came across that he wanted to tell. It was a very difficult time, especially as I was only 18, and that's an age where you should really gain more independence, not less. And my lower back gives me chronic pain issues, and the muscles are still weak, and I still have physiotherapy exercises. Chronic pain and chronic fatigue have just become something that I have to deal with. And this is why I like characters like Drifter, disabled protagonists that have this chronic disability that they grapple with, and it causes them immense pain, but they still strive for their own goals outside of that and try their best. To pick up on a point from earlier, I find it particularly interesting the idea of disability personified as this kind of monster, in the case of Hyper Light Drifter as the looming otherworldly figure or creature that Drifter grapples with throughout the game. This seems to reflect the concept of the shadow, which is often adopted as a storytelling technique, and its origins lie with Jung, who lists the shadow as one of the brain's archetypes, a distorted mirror or an alter ego of the self. The shadow is the damaging parts of ourself that we struggle to face. Another story that includes this and its own version of the shadow is in A Wizard of Earthsea by Ursula K. Le Guin, and Ged, a young wizard, attempts a dangerous spell and on accident summons an unnamed shadow creature. Through it blazed a terrible brightness, and through the bright misshapen breach clambered something like a clot of black shadow, quick and hideous, and it leapt straight out at Ged's face. Ged gave a short, hoarse scream. Throughout the rest of the book, the shadow is figuratively tied to Ged, following him wherever he goes, much like Drifter's shadow in the game. Ged is also permanently disfigured from this, and his healing process is long and painful, almost resulting in his death. Although not explicitly portrayed as a disabled protagonist, I feel it could be argued that Ged falls into this category. Experiencing this traumatic, near-death injury and then being left with permanent scars. Soon after, he dreamed of the thing like a bear with no head or face. He thought it went fumbling about the walls of the house, searching for the door. Such a dream he had not dreamed since the healing of the wounds the thing had given him. When he woke, he was weak and cold, and the scars on his face and shoulder drew and ached. Jumping back to Jung slightly, it should be noted that the shadow as an archetypal concept is not necessarily bad or evil. It is instead more what the individual seeks to repress, and represses it so much that it sinks into the subconscious. But this doesn't get rid of their shadow, it just changes its shape, and it will continue to follow them. Another example of character's own shadow is in the book Marasai by Maria Turchnaninoff. Marasai, the main character, has a shadow born from her trauma, surviving a winter of starvation but losing her younger sister. The book starts with her in her present life, living away from her family at the Red Abbey, an island of all women focusing on providing other women and girls with knowledge and safety. They worship the triple goddess, the passage of life, maiden, mother, and crone. During the moon dance, Marasai is called into the house of worship of the crone, seeing the same shining silver door of death that she saw on the night her sister died. Something loomed large in the centre of the labyrinth. In the vibrating, trembling night, it was the only thing whose form was fixed and clear. It was a door, tall and narrow and silver in the bright moonlight. It was closed, but I could sense the darkness that waited on the other side. Darkness so deep, not even the light of the moon could penetrate it. It was the door from the hunger winter, and behind it the crone was waiting. I danced on the threshold as the voice of the crone scratched at my bones. "This is your house," said the crone, and the terror became so great that I finally found my voice. "I do not want to," I screamed. After this, we see her haunted by her trauma, and her refusal to accept it, just as Drifter is haunted by the illness he seeks a cure for. All darkness scared me. Wherever shadows gathered, I thought I could sense the door to the other realm, the realm of the crone. Shadows seemed to be everywhere. The sun did not feel as bright as before. Everything was darker. In every gust of wind, in every ocean whisper, I expected to hear the voice of the crone. Drifter's ambiguity of a cure, and Marasai's fear of the crone and the unknown, both linking to their own fragile mortality, gives birth to their own shadows of the psyche, albeit personified in different ways. Ged's shadow, on the other hand, in A Wizard of Earthsea, also comes from his trauma, much like Marasai's, born out of a traumatic event. And although he embraces and names his shadow as part of himself at the end of the first book, his story is far from over. We see Ged again in nearly all the following books, albeit not as the protagonist. In the fourth book, Tahanu, Ged is reintroduced, but powerless, older, having lost all of his magic one book previous. He has been disabled in a sense. He has to adapt to a new way of living, like I myself had to adapt and build my strength back up and start walking again in hospital. This adaptation isn't easy for him. He isolates himself from those he knows, and starts to become more solitary and closed off. His loss of magic causes him great pain. As his strength returned little by little, that frown, the held breath and clenched hands became familiar to Tenor. Strength returned to him, but no ease, not health. He sat on the doorstep of the house in the sunlight of the summer afternoon. It was the longest journey he had yet taken from his bed. But as he starts to open up, He finds new strength in supporting and allowing support from his newfound family, Tenar and Theru.
And when Ged came in, heavy-eyed and unkempt, she went straight to him and put up her arms. "Theru," he said, and took her up and held her. She clung to him briefly, then broke free. "I know the beginning part of the creation," she told him. "Will you sing it to me?" Again glancing at Tenar for permission, he sat down at his place at the hearth.
Now, Theru herself is Tenar and later also Ged's adopted child, and is immensely haunted by her own past which led to her disability. And Tenar often thinks about how difficult it is to bridge the gap across that gulf of hurt and pain in the book, Tahani. It's easier to run, but this only makes the shadow loom ever larger. Just like how Drifter cannot ever outrun his shadow in the game, it appears in cutscenes all across the map no matter where you go. There was a gap, a void, a gulf, on beyond the right and the truth. Love, her love for Theru and Theru's love for her, made a bridge across that gap, a bridge of spiderweb, but love did not fill or close it. Nothing did that. Ged has to gain the ability to change, adapt, and again face his shadow in a new form. Disability is often a huge loss of self, having to craft a new way of living, a new way of thinking and acting every day going forwards. This is only made harder when you resist. There's no escaping your own shadow. To overcome the shadow, one must change. Whether growing from trauma or adapting to disability, the shadow needs to be faced. Its power comes from being suppressed. Like Marasai finally facing the crone, or Ged meeting and naming his shadow, and then later adapting to his new way of living, or Drifter fighting instead of running from his shadow, leading into the calmness and clarity of Panacea and the clear blue sky above. Despite the ambiguity, the world is shown to be bettered, peaceful, and healed by Drifter's hand.